It's an honor to be asked by Catholic Stewardship Consultants to participate in these conferences from time to time, and as you can tell, we certainly support and recognize the important work that they're, and message and concept that they're trying to spread across this country. But I want to first start with the importance of the individual conversion to stewardship. If all of us, and pastors included, if all of us haven't gone through that individual conversion, that change in attitude of the heart and mind, probably not a whole lot is going to happen in terms of we as individuals, and it takes we as individuals to bring this to fruition in the parish, and in our case here within the diocese. So beginning with that individual conversion thing, I want to bring you back to a quote that's in this pastoral letter on stewardship. And I know it's been mentioned several times today. If you haven't read it, maybe you know something about the summary, but I'm going to be a little bit stronger about this. If you haven't read it, you ought to read it. And it ought to be one of the manuals that we use in the formation and education of stewardship at the parish, within our communities, within the parish pastoral councils, whatever the case may be. That and the Bible are the two things. Anyhow, in this letter it says, beginning in conversion, change of mind and heart, this commitment is expressed not in a single action, nor even in a number of actions over a period of time, but in an entire way of life. You heard about that way of life beginning with Msgr this morning, and believe me, over my 40 years of knowing Msgr, I've heard it many, many times. So I'm going to start with the individual conversion, my own individual conversion. I was a tough convert. I'm not a convert to the faith, but I was a tough convert to this thing called stewardship because I had the wrong notion that it was nothing but that dollar sign some 40 years ago. So excuse me for that. Anyhow, a job relocation brought my wife and I to Wichita some 40 years ago, and we'd only been married 5 years at the time. We had 3 children. And we were leaving all of our family and friends in Colorado, northeastern Colorado, to move to Wichita for a job with the Federal Farm Credit System, a job that I dearly wanted to take and accept, and we did. But we left everything in Colorado, family, friends, and we moved here where we literally had no family, no friends. And so, as you can imagine, community was going to be important to us. And we knew it was going to be important, but we didn't know anything about how to facilitate that. By a stroke of luck, we purchased a home within the boundaries of St. Francis of Assisi Parish. And had no idea what that was about to evolve into. The parish was only 7 years old at that time, and it was struggling, as Msgr pointed out, struggling in many, many ways. We immediately witnessed, not that we were all so smart, but it was not a very welcoming place at that time. In fact, it was terrible. There was a few small cliques that were running the place. Msgr would agree with this, I can assure you, when he arrived later. And it just, you couldn't break into the place. You just did not even feel welcome there. So we were beginning to wonder, wait a minute, what kind of a place did we move into? Anyhow, shortly thereafter, this new pastor by the name of Thomas McGread was appointed in 1968. And as you can imagine, he immediately began preaching on this thing called stewardship. His Irish pronunciation of it. And, stewardship was not in our vocabulary, my wife and I. We hadn't heard that word from northeastern Colorado. I suppose we were practicing it in many ways, but it just wasn't in our vocabulary. But we began to hear him preach on this spiritual thing called stewardship, this way of life, and it was with a bit of this Irish brogue of his, worse than what you were hearing today back in 40 years ago, and you had to listen pretty carefully to understand the guy, or at least I did. And he had what I would call a 4-point thing that he was, or vision, if you will, for long-term success, if this was all going to work. And those 4 things were these: that a parish should first become a place of hospitality, must be a welcoming place. And believe me, it wasn't before that. It should become a place where parishioners would truly be invited and have the opportunity and the invitation to respond to and live out their baptismal call to discipleship. And 3, A parish should strive to provide the needs of its parishioners, we've heard that throughout the day, as well as the structure and the related leadership to carry it out. Very important. And fourth, then, he was saying if these three things were in place, it was his belief that the financial resources would automatically be forthcoming. Oh, how true. Time has proven that. So in my wife and I's formation process and all of this, we began to hear this thing about time and talent because that's all he talked about to begin with. Nothing about finance. Even though the parish was struggling financially, he was not talking about that. He had the faith that if we worked on these other two T's, these other two legs, that third leg would be automatically forthcoming. Well, for me in all of this, it was that initial important recognition of what is gift. What is giftedness? I quite honestly did not recognize giftedness. I didn't know what gift was. I thought it was that package at Christmas or birthday time, nicely wrapped and ribbon around it. That was gift to me. And so I had no idea that I was gifted. And I soon learned that giftedness is so much more than that box. You know, there's the gift of life, the gift of family, and the good Lord has been very generous to my wife and I in terms of family, maybe overly generous. We have 4 children and 23 grandchildren. And the biggest gift of those grandchildren is one severely handicapped grandchild. And I got to tell you, that's the biggest gift that we've ever had, and she is the magnet of our family, without question. But there's a gift of health, a gift of freedom, and all of those things that all of you can list. So as I began to develop this sense of giftedness, I began to then have this sense of the need to be grateful for that giftedness and to return it generously and sacrificially back to the good Lord for all of his love and giftedness to me and my wife. So before long, we in the parish were experiencing this invitation, this opportunity to become involved and to share of our gifts of time, talent, and treasure towards the broad mission of the parish. And Msgr always felt that we also needed to extend that giftedness and that thanksgiving onto the diocese as well as the Church Universal. Our gifts of time and talent as well as our treasure evolved more and more as time went on, and particularly after we got more involved in the parish. And that seems to be a natural transition, if you will. But with minimal emphasis from the pulpit, from Msgr, we began to give more generously of our treasure, and it just seemed to automatically take place. We were initially invited to give 5% of our gross income. Now, believe me, Msgr McGread didn't mention this today, but his middle name is Gross. You give of your gross income, not after taxes. And we did. 5% of our gross to the parish, he asked us to do, and 2% to other charities of our choice. Now, let me tell you, this 5% thing was tough for this guy that's educated in finance and accounting, because I was going from a $5 per week kind of guy to 5% per week of gross income. You talk about a leap of faith, folks. That was tough. And my convert wife was pushing me all the way. And later on, Msgr asked us to, not us, but the whole parish, to expand that giving to 8% of gross and 2% to other charities, where it is today. That's our diocesan guideline. And we got to that stage of giving in 1977, and that 8% of gross to our parish remains today, as it has for the last 40 years in our life. As a result of all this, and within a short time, in this conversion process of many others in the parish, St. Francis was back on all 4 legs, standing tall in a very short period of time, and generally meeting the specific needs of its parishioners. And this quick turnaround was a result of this conversion that was going on of many of the individuals within that parish community. We were all understanding the need to return generously and sacrificially, and this is important, mark this down, of our need to give rather than giving only when there is a need. Let me repeat that. We were learning to give out of our need to give rather than giving only when there is a need. You know, as Catholics, we're great about stepping up and fixing the furnace when it falters, but leave me alone until some of the need comes up. If we give out of our need to give, folks, a lot of those things will be automatically taken care of when they occur. Well, St. Francis moved along and things were going great, and it was a result of all this conversion that was taking place. People were getting actively involved, so on and so forth. And then this thing about St. Francis began to be a little bit of a success story around the country. And you know what people were hearing? The only thing they were hearing and noticing was the collection amount that we had. That's all they were hearing about. They would call us, call Msgr. They'd want to come and visit us and expect to go home the next weekend and have $80,000 in the collection plate. Well, as you all know, that's not going to happen. It can happen over time, but it's certainly not going to happen overnight. But what was more important in that collection was the internal things that were going on at St. Francis. And there was three things. It was that spiritual conversion of people, all those things you've heard about today, the change in the hearts and the minds and the attitudes of individuals, and this discipleship in action, this stewardship thing that was going on within the parish. It was Msgr, in a way, although the four pillars that we talk about today in this diocese, we really hadn't identified those as we know them today, but Msgr was always talking about three things: prayer, hospitality, and service. And another middle name he had was hospitality. Very good at all that hospitality. But all those three things were very strong in the parish. But the most important one is that of prayer. And you heard a lot about that today. Prayer is very important. It's very important in my life, in the life of our family, and to appropriately use of our time for prayer. And Msgr always made sure that we had all kinds of prayer opportunities at St. Francis. I want to share a story about my own personal prayer experience. Some of you have heard this before, and I apologize for having to hear it again. It's a true story. 21 years ago, St. Francis began a perpetual adoration. We were all invited to sign up for an hour or more a week and get in these slots so that we knew we had all the hours filled when we started it up. This convert wife of mine suggested that we hold back a bit and see where they might have a slot that they couldn't fill. Okay, Carolyn, that's fine. So I think you know where I'm going. But anyhow, I came home one evening after work, and I was met at the door. That's very strange. And she says, "We got our call today." And I signed us up for adoration. I said, "Great, Carolyn. What hour do we have?" And she said, "I signed us up for 2 a.m. every Friday morning." Well, let me assure you, I was not ready for 2 a.m. That's not what I was planning on. And I said, "Carolyn, you must be kidding. 2 a.m. every Friday morning, and you did not even consult with me." And she said, "Dan, no," and I knew I did not have to, because we have no other obligations at 2 a.m. every Friday morning. So you can tell where we've been every Friday morning. Anyhow, that's been a great experience for us, adoration. At 2 a.m. in the morning, it's very quiet. And, right now, I want to dwell a little bit on some of the successes at St. Francis, the witness of all of that, and to tell you a little bit of the importance of the role of the pastor. We've heard about how important that is.